It is wonderful the way a little town keeps track of itself and all of its units. If every single man and woman, child and baby acts and conducts itself in a known pattern and breaks no walls and differs with no one and experiments in no way and is not sick and does not endanger the ease and peace of mind or steady unbroken flow of the town, then that unit can disappear and never be heard of. But let one man step out of the regular thought or the known and trusted pattern, and the nerves of the townspeople ring with nervousness, and communication travels over the nerve lines of the town. Then every unit communicates to the whole. Thus in La Paz it is known in the early morning through the whole town that Kino is going to sell his pearl that day. It was known among the neighbors in the brush huts, among the pearl fishermen. It was known among the Chinese grocery store owners. It was known in the church, for the altar boys whispered about it. Word of it crept in among the nuns. The beggars in front of the church spoke of it, for they would be there to take the tithe of the first fruits of the luck. The little boys knew about it with excitement, but most of all the pearl buyers knew about it. And when the day had come, in the offices of the pearl buyers, each man sat alone with his little black velvet tray, and each man rolled the pearls about with his fingertips and considered his part in the picture. It was supposed that the pearl buyers were individuals acting alone, bidding against one another for the pearls the fishermen brought in. And once it had been so, but this was a wasteful method, for often in the excitement of bidding for a fine pearl, too great a price had been paid to the fishermen. This was extravagant and not to be countenanced. Now there was only one pearl buyer with many hands, and the men who sat in their offices and waited for Kino knew what price they would offer, how high they would bid, and what method each one would use. And although these men would not profit beyond their salaries, there was excitement among the pearl buyers, for there was excitement in the hunt. And if it be a man's function to break down a price, then he must take joy and satisfaction in breaking it as far down as possible. For every man in the world functions to the best of his ability, and no one does less than his best, no matter what he may think about it. Quite apart from any reward they might get, from any word of praise, from any promotion, a pearl buyer was a pearl buyer, and the best and happiest pearl buyer was he who bought for the lowest prices. The sun was hot yellow that morning, and it drew the moisture from the estuary and from the gulf and hung it in shimmering scarves in the air so that the air vibrated and vision was insubstantial. A vision hung in the air to the north of the city, the vision of a mountain that was over 200 miles away, and the high slopes of this mountain were swaddled with pines, and a great stone peak arose above the timberline. And the morning of this day the canoes lay lined up on the beach. The fishermen did not go out to dive for pearls, for there would be too much happening, too many things to see, when Kino went to sell the great pearl. In the brush houses by the shore, Kino's neighbors sat long over their breakfasts, and they spoke of what they would do if they had found the pearl. And one man said that he would give it as a present to the Holy Father in Rome. Another said that he would buy masses for the souls of his family for 1,000 years. Another thought he might take the money and distribute it among the poor of La Paz. And a fourth thought of all the good things he could do with the money from the pearl, of all the charities, benefits, of all the rescues one could perform if one had money. All of the neighbors hoped that sudden wealth would not turn Kino's head, would not make a rich man of him, would not graft onto him the evil limbs of greed and hatred and coldness. For Kino was a well-liked man. It would be a shame if the pearl destroyed him. That good wife Juana, they said, and the beautiful baby Coyotito, and the others to come. What a pity it would be if the pearl should destroy them all. For Kino and Juana this was the morning of mornings of their lives, comparable only to the day when the baby had been born. This was to be the day from which all other days would take their arrangement. Thus they would say, "It was 2 years before we sold the pearl," or "It was 6 weeks after we sold the pearl." Juana considered the matter, threw caution to the winds, and dressed Coyotito in the clothes she had prepared for his baptism, when there would be money for his baptism. And Juana combed and braided her hair and tied the ends with 2 little bows of red ribbon, and she put on her marriage skirt and waist. The sun was quarter high when they were ready. Kino's ragged white clothes were clean at least, and this was the last day of his raggedness, for tomorrow, or even this afternoon, he would have new clothes. The neighbors, watching Kino's door through the crevices in their brush houses, were dressed and ready too. There was no self-consciousness about their joining Kino and Juana to go pearl selling. It was expected. It was a historic moment. They would be crazy if they didn't go. It would be almost a sign of unfriendship. Juana put on her head shawl carefully, and she draped one long end under her right elbow and gathered it with her right hand, so that a hammock hung under her arm. And in this little hammock she placed Coyotito, propped up against the head shawl, so that he could see everything and perhaps remember. Kino put on his large straw hat and felt it with his hand to see that it was properly placed, not on the back or side of his head, like a rash, unmarried, irresponsible man, and not flat as an elder would wear it, but tilted a little forward to show aggressiveness and seriousness and vigor. There is a great deal to be seen in the tilt of a hat on a man. Kino slipped his feet into his sandals and pulled the thongs up over his heels. The great pearl was wrapped in an old soft piece of deerskin and placed in a little leather bag, and the leather bag was in a pocket in Kino's shirt. He folded his blanket carefully and draped it in a narrow strip over his left shoulder, and now they were ready. Kino stepped with dignity out of the house, and Juana followed him, carrying Coyotito, and as they marched up the freshest washed valley toward the town, the neighbors joined them. The houses belched people, the doorways spewed out children, but because of the seriousness of the occasion, only one man walked with Kino, and that was his brother, Juan Tomas. Juan Tomas cautioned his brother. "You must be careful to see they do not cheat you," he said, and very carefully. Kino agreed. "We do not know what prices are paid in other places," said Juan Tomas. "How can we know what is a fair price, if we do not know what the pearl buyer gets for the pearl in another place?" "That is true," said Kino, "but how can we know? We are here, we are not there." As they walked up towards the city, the crowd grew behind them, and Juan Tomas, in pure nervousness, went on speaking. "Before you were born, Kino," he said, "the old ones thought of a way to get more money for their pearls. They thought it would be better if they had an agent who took all the pearls to the capital and sold them there and kept only his share of the profit." Kino nodded his head. "I know," he said. "It was a good thought." "And so they got such a man," said Juan Tomas. "They pooled the pearls and they started him off, and he was never heard of again, and the pearls were lost. Then they got another man, and they started him off, and he was never heard of again. And so they gave the whole thing up and went back to the old way." "I know," said Kino. "I have heard our father tell of it. It was a good idea, but it was against religion, and the father made that very clear. The loss of the pearl was a punishment visited on those who tried to leave their station. And the Father made it clear that each man and woman is like a soldier sent by God to guard some part of the castle of the universe, and some are in the ramparts, and some are far deep in the darkness of the walls. but each one must remain faithful to his post and must not go running about, else the castle is in danger from the assaults of hell." "I've heard him make that sermon," said Juan Tomas. "He makes it every year." The brothers, as they walked along, squinted their eyes a little, as they and their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers had done for 400 years, since the first strangers came with argument and authority and gunpowder to back up both. And in the 400 years Kino's people had learned only one defense, a slight slitting of the eyes and a slight tightening of the lips and a retirement. Nothing could break down this wall, and they could remain whole within the wall. The gathering procession was solemn, for they sensed the importance of this day, and any children who showed a tendency to scuffle, to scream, to cry out, to steal hats and rumple hair were hissed to silence by their elders. So important was this day that an old man came to see, riding on the stalwart shoulders of his nephew. The procession left the brush huts and entered the stone and plaster city, where the streets were a little wider, and there were narrow pavements beside the building. And as before, the beggars joined them as they passed the church. The grocers looked out at them as they went by. The little salons lost their customers, and the owners closed up shop and went along. And the sun beat down on the streets of the city, and even tiny stones threw shadows on the ground. The news of the approach of the procession ran ahead of it, and in their little dark offices the pearl buyers stiffened and grew alert. They got out their papers so that they could be at work when Kino appeared, and they put their pearls in the desks, for it is not good to let an inferior pearl be beside a beauty. And word of the loveliness of Kino's pearl had come to them. The pearl buyers' offices were clustered together in one narrow street, and they were barred at the windows. The wooden slats cut out the light, so that only a soft gloom entered the offices. A stout, slow man sat in an office waiting. His face was fatherly and benign. His eyes twinkled with friendship. He was a caller of good mornings, a ceremonious shaker of hands, a jolly man who knew all jokes, and yet who hovered close to sadness. For in the midst of a laugh he could remember the death of your aunt, and his eyes could become wet with sorrow for your loss. This morning he had placed a flower in a vase on his desk, a single scarlet hibiscus, and the vase sat beside the black velvet-lined pearl tray in front of him. He was shaved close to the blue roots of his beard, and his hands were clean, and his nails polished. His door stood open to the morning, and he hummed under his breath, while his right hand practiced legerdemain. He rolled a coin back and forth over his knuckles, and made it appear and disappear, made it spin and sparkle. The coin winked into sight and as quickly slipped out of sight, and the man did not even watch his own performance. The fingers did it all mechanically, precisely, while the man hummed to himself and peered out the door. Then he heard the tramp of feet of the approaching crowd, and the fingers of his right hand worked faster and faster as the figure of Kino filled the doorway. The coin flashed and disappeared. "Good morning, my friend," the stout man said. "What can I do for you?" Kino stared into the dimness of the little office, for his eyes were squeezed from the outside glare, but the buyer's eyes had become as steady and cruel and unwinking as a hawk's eyes, while the rest of his face smiled in greeting, and secretly behind his desk his right hand practiced with the coin. "I have a pearl," said Kino, and Juan Tomas stood beside him and snorted a little at the understatement. The neighbors peered around the doorway, and a line of little boys clambered on the window bars and looked through. Several little boys, on their hands and knees, watched the scene around Kino's legs. "You have a pearl," the dealer said. "Sometimes a man brings in a dozen. Well, let us see your pearl. We will value it and give you the best price." And his fingers worked fiercely with the coin. Now Kino instinctively knew his own dramatic effects. Slowly he brought out the leather bag, slowly took from it the soft and dirty piece of deerskin, and then he let the great pearl roll into the back of the velvet tray, and instantly his eyes went to the buyer's face. But there was no sign, no movement. The face did not change, but the secret hand behind the desk missed in its precision. The coin stumbled over a knuckle and slipped slightly into the dealer's lap, and the fingers behind the desk curled into a fist. When the right hand came out of hiding, the forefinger touched the great pearl, rolled it on the black velvet. Thumb and forefinger picked it up and brought it near the dealer's eyes, and twirled it in the air. Kino held his breath, and the neighbors held their breath, and the whispering went back through the crowd. He is inspecting it. No prices have been mentioned yet. They have not come to a price. Now the dealer's hand had become a personality. He tossed the great pearl back into the tray. The forefinger poked and insulted it, and on the dealer's face there had come a sad and contemptuous smile. "I'm sorry, my friend," he said, and his shoulders rose a little to indicate that the misfortune was no fault of his. "It is a pearl of great value," Kino said. The dealer's fingers spun the pearl so that it bounced and rebounded softly from the side of the velvet tray. "You have heard of fool's gold," the dealer said. "This pearl is like fool's gold. It is too large. Who would buy it? There is no market for such things. It is a curiosity only. I am sorry. You thought it was a thing of value, and it is only a curiosity." Now Kino's face was perplexed and worried. "It is the pearl of the world," he cried. "No one has ever seen such a pearl." "On the contrary," said the dealer, "it is large and clumsy. As a curiosity it has interest. Some museums might perhaps take it to place in a collection of seashells. I can give you, say, 1,000 pesos. Kino's face grew dark and dangerous. "It is worth 50,000, he said. "You know it. You want to cheat me." And the dealer heard a little grumble go through the crowd as they heard his price, and the dealer felt a little tremor of fear. "Do not blame me," he said quickly. "I am only an appraiser. Ask the others. Go to their offices and show your pearl. Or better, let them come here, so that you can see there is no collusion. Boy," he called, and when his servant looked through the rear door, "Boy, go to such a one, and such another one, and such a third one. Ask them to step in here, and do not tell them why. Just say that I will be pleased to see them." And his right hand went behind the desk and pulled another coin from his pocket, and the coin rolled back and forth over the knuckles. Kino's neighbors whispered together. They had been afraid of something like this. The pearl was large, but it had a strange color. They had been suspicious of it from the first, and after all, 1,000 pesos was not to be thrown away. It was comparative wealth to a man who was not wealthy. And suppose Kino took 1,000 pesos. Only yesterday he had nothing. But Kino had grown tight and hard. He felt the creeping of fate, the circling of wolves, the hover of vultures. He felt the evil coagulating about him, and he was helpless to protect himself. He heard in his ears the evil music, and on the black velvet the great pearl glistened, so that the dealer could not keep his eyes from it. The crowd in the doorway wavered and broke, and let the 3 pearl dealers through. The crowd was silent now, fearing to miss a word, to fail to see a gesture or an expression. Kino was silent and watchful. He felt a little tugging at his back, and turned and looked into Juana's eyes, and when he looked away he had renewed strength. The dealers did not glance at one another, nor at the pearl. The man behind the desk said, "I have put a value on this pearl. The owner here does not think it fair. I will ask you to examine this thing and make an offer. Notice," he said to Kino, "I have not mentioned what I have offered." The first dealer, dry and stringy, seemed now to see the pearl for the first time. He took it up, rolled it quickly between thumb and forefinger, and then cast it contemptuously back into the tray. "Do not include me in the discussion," he said dryly. "I will make no offer at all. I do not want it. This is not a pearl. It is a monstrosity." His thin lips curled. Now the second dealer, a little man with a shy, soft voice, took up the pearl, and he examined it carefully. He took a glass from his pocket and inspected it under the magnification. Then he laughed slowly. "Better pearls are made of paste," he said. "I know these things. This is soft and chalky. It will lose its color and die in a few months. Look." He offered the glass to Kino, showed him how to use it, and Kino, who had never seen a pearl's surface magnified, was shocked at the strange-looking surface. The third dealer took the pearl from Kino's hands. "One of my clients likes such things," he said. "I will offer 500 pesos, and perhaps I can sell it to my client for 600. Kino reached quickly and snatched the pearl from his hand. He wrapped it in the deerskin and thrust it inside his shirt. The man behind the desk said, "I'm a fool, I know, but my first offer stands. I still offer 1,000. "What are you doing?" he asked, as Kino thrust the pearl out of sight. "I am cheated," Kino cried fiercely. "My pearl is not for sale here. I will go, perhaps, even to the capital." Now the dealers glanced quickly at one another. They knew they had played too hard. They knew they would be disciplined for their failure. And the man at the desk said quickly, "I might go to 1,500. But Kino was pushing his way through the crowd. The hum of talk came to him dimly. His rage blood pounded in his ears, and he burst through and strode away. Juana followed, trotting after him. When the evening came, the neighbors in the brush houses sat eating their corn cakes and beans, and they discussed the great theme of the morning. They did not know. It seemed a fine pearl to them, but they had never seen such a pearl before, and surely the dealers knew more about the values of pearls than they. "And mark this," they said, "those dealers did not discuss these things. Each of the three knew the pearl was valueless. But suppose they had arranged it before? If that is so, then all of us have been cheated all of our lives." Perhaps, some argued, perhaps it would have been better if Kino took the 1,500 pesos. That is a great deal of money, more than he has ever seen. Maybe Kino is being a pig-headed fool. Suppose he should really go to the capital and find no buyer for his pearl. He would never live that down. And now, said other fearful ones, now that he had defied them, those buyers will not want to deal with him at all. Maybe Kino has cut off his own head and destroyed himself. And others said, "Kino is a brave man and a fierce man. He is right. From his courage we may all profit." These were proud of Kino. In his house, Kino squatted on his sleeping mat, brooding. He had buried his pearl under a stone of the fire hole in his house, and he stared at the woven tools of his sleeping mat until the cross design danced in his head. He had lost one world and had not gained another, and Kino was afraid. Never in his life had he been far from home. He was afraid of strangers and of strange places. He was terrified of that monster of strangeness they called the capital. It lay over the water and through the mountains, over 1,000 miles, and every strange, terrible mile was frightening. But Kino had lost his old world, and he must clamber on to a new one, for his dream of the future was real, and never to be destroyed, and he said, "I will go," and that made a real thing too. Too determined to go and to say it was to be halfway there. Juana watched him while he buried his pearl, and she watched him while she cleaned Coyotito and nursed him, and Juana made the corn cakes for supper. Juan Tomas came in and squatted down beside Kino and remained silent for a long time, until at last Kino demanded, "What else could I do? They are cheats." Juan Tomas nodded gravely. He was the elder, and Kino looked to him for wisdom. "It is hard to know," he said, "but We do know that we are cheated from birth to the overcharge on our coffins, but we survive. You have defied not the pearl buyers, but the whole structure, the whole way of life, and I am afraid for you." "What have I to fear but starvation?" Kino asked. But Juan Tomas shook his head slowly. "That we must all fear. But suppose you are correct, suppose your pearl is of great value. Do you think then the game is over?" "What do you mean?" "I don't know," said Juan Tomas, "but I'm afraid for you. It is new ground you are walking on. You do not know the way." I will go soon," said Kino. "Yes," Juan Tomas agreed, "that you must do. But I wonder if you will find it any different in the capital. Here you have friends, and me, your brother. There you will have no one." "What can I do?" Kino cried. "Some deep outrage is here. My son must have a chance. That is what they are striking at. My friends will protect me." "Only so long as they are not in danger or discomfort from it," said Juan Tomas. He arose, saying, "Go with God." And Kino said, "Go with God," and did not even look up, for the words had a strange chill in them. Long after Juan Tomas had gone, Kino sat brooding on his sleeping mat. A lethargy had settled on him, and a little gray hopelessness. Every road seemed blocked against him. In his head he heard only the dark music of the enemy. His senses were burning alive, but his mind went back to the deep participation with all things, the gift he had from his people. He heard every little sound of the gathering night, the sleepy complaint of settling birds, the love agony of cats, the strike and withdrawal of little waves on the beach, and the simple hiss of distance. He could smell the sharp odor of exposed kelp from the receding tide. The little flare of the twig fire made the design on his sleeping mat jump before his entranced eyes. Juana watched him with worry, but she knew, and she knew she could help him best by being silent and being near. And as though she too could hear the song of evil, she fought it, singing softly the melody of the family, of the safety and warmth and wholeness of the family. She held Coyotito in her arms and sang the song to him, to keep the evil out, and her voice was brave against the threat of the dark music. Kino did not move nor ask for his supper. She knew he would ask when he wanted it. His eyes were entranced, and he could sense the wary, watchful evil outside the brush house. He could feel the dark, creeping things waiting for him to go out into the night. It was shadowy and dreadful, and yet it called to him and threatened him and challenged him. His right hand went into his shirt and felt his knife. His eyes were wide. He stood up and walked to the doorway. Juana willed to stop him. She raised her hand to stop him, and her mouth opened with terror. For a long moment Kino looked out into the darkness, and then he stepped outside. Juana heard the little rush, the grunting struggle, the blow. She froze with terror for a moment, and then her lips drew back from her teeth like a cat's lips. She set Coyotito down on the ground. She seized the stone from the fireplace and rushed outside. But it was over by then. Kino lay on the ground, struggling to rise, and there was no one near him, only the shadows and the strike and rush of waves and hiss of distance. But the evil was all about, hidden behind the brush fence, crouched beside the house in the shadow, hovering in the air. Juana dropped her stone and put her arms around Kino and helped him to his feet and supported him into the house. Blood oozed down from his scalp, and there was a long, deep cut in his cheek from ear to chin, a deep, bleeding slash, and Kino was only half conscious. He shook his head from side to side. His shirt was torn open and his clothes half pulled off. Juana sat him down on his sleeping mat, and she wiped the thickening blood from his face with her skirt. She brought him pulque to drink in a little pitcher, and still he shook his head to clear out the darkness. "Who?" Juana asked. "I don't know," Kino said. "I didn't see." Now Juana brought her clay pot of water, and she washed the cut on his face, while he stared dazed ahead of him. "Kino, my husband," she cried, and his eyes stared past her. "Kino, can you hear me?" "I hear you," he said dully. "Kino, this pearl is evil. Let us destroy it before it destroys us. Let us crush it between two stones. Let us throw it back in the sea where it belongs, Kino. It is evil. It is evil." And as she spoke, the light came back in Kino's eyes, so that they glowed fiercely and his muscles hardened, and his will hardened. "No," he said, "I will fight this thing. I will win over it. We will have our chance." His fist pounded the sleeping mat. "No one shall take our good fortune from us," he said. His eyes softened. Then he raised a gentle hand to Juana's shoulder. "Believe me," he said, "I am a man," and his face grew crafty. "In the morning we will take our canoe and we will go over the sea and over the mountains to the capital, you and I. We will not be cheated. I am a man." "Kino," she said huskily, "I am afraid. A man can be killed. Let us throw the pearl back into the sea." "Hush," he said fiercely, "I am a man. Hush." And she was silent, for his voice was command. "Let us sleep a little," he said. "In the first light we will start. You are not afraid to go with me?" "No, my husband." His eyes were soft and warm on her then. His hand touched her cheek. "Let us sleep a little," he said.